welcome back, everybody. And today I would love to invite you to welcome our guest, Joshua. Thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome. I'm very glad to be here with you, Karen.
Very lovely. Let's get started. So, Joshua is known as the ambassador of peace. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Well, I'm known as an ambassador of peace because I've been walking in God's will for more than 20 years now, 25 years maybe. And so I've been invited as an ambassador of peace to talk in Venezuela, for example, in difficult moments of that country in 2012. And, I've been also visiting people of different cultures and different, let's call them tribes in different nations. And so they also received me, some of them as an ambassador of peace. And of course, the definition of an ambassador of peace for me might be a little bit different than a political definition or a title given by the United Nations. I mean, an ambassador of peace for me is a person who walks in peace and represents the peace of the Creator or the peace of the greater peace in the universe to all people. And so I started that journey after a set of very meaningful experiences that I had in Venezuela when I was consulting banks and oil industries and lecturing at university. And after very meaningful events that I would call God's order, however, maybe Carl Jung will call them synchronicities, I decided to close all my businesses and things and walk like the prophets of ancient Israel, the prophets of old in complete faith, and just dedicate myself to do that for the peace of humanity in a simple way, just meeting people a day at a time. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years. Wow, let's see, since 1994, 1995, 1994.
3 years.
Yeah, more or less.
Amazing. And may I ask what that synchronicity event was like? Was it like a voice, or was it like an event that happened in the physical plane that made you said, "Okay, I'm doing this as an ambassador of peace"?
Well, there was more than one event. There was a set of events, but some of the events, started 10 years before I made that decision. Um, in a journey that I had on a sailing boat to the islands, the Caribbean islands in front of Venezuela called Los Roques. And in there, I had a very deep experience after a very powerful storm where I had to lead the boat almost all night, and my friends were very sick and so on. But I managed to get them all safe. That was the boat of my good friend Robert. And then what happened is that I went to the beach that night to rest because I was very exhausted from that physical, battle with the elements. And and then in that night I was awakened very deeply, awakening from a very deep sleep, and I didn't know why. I had so much energy, so I went outside and I saw a group of stars, and then I went into tears. And there was no reason for me to go into tears or anything like that. I've seen stars many times in my life, but then my girlfriend at that time came out of the tent, a little bit concerned what was going on with you because I was kind of sobbing. And my hand just went like that, and she understood that she had to leave me, to whatever what's happening. And so after I recovered from that deep experience, at that, let's say 10 minutes later, I called her and I told her, "You want to know what happened to me?" And she said, "Yeah. See, those star systems are there?" And she said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, that's who I am. I don't know how to explain that better. I have that's who I am, and I'm here. I mean, I am the light of those stars." So that connection, that unity was made very evident within my own experience of life and consciousness. So, of course, she said, "Well, that's strange," and I said, "Yeah, that's pretty strange. I've never experienced something like that." But that day I was quiet on my own at the beach, walking, trying to make something rational out of that experience. Because at that time, I was teaching at university. I was, I played the saxophone, I surfed. Those were my normal doings on those days. I mean, I was a person like everybody else. So I thought, wow, I don't want to put that story or what's happening to me to my friends in the sailing boat that we were traveling, because they were very good friends of mine, but they will always in humor. So if I say to them, look, I'm those stars, they say, oh, give him another vodka or something like that. Not that we drank too much, but it's just a figure of speech to tell you, that people didn't really delved in those subjects. But I went to the boat at the end of the day, next day after that experience, and my friends were there, cooking what they fished that day in the ocean. And my good friend told me, I know you enough to know that when you're silent and so reflective, something's going on. So could you tell me what's going on? I said, well, funny that you mentioned, because I was pretty keen to keep it to myself, since I don't want to put that deep experience on a table where there's going to be jokes about them. Because not that I don't like humor, they know me for being a very humorous person, but there are moments for humor, and there are moments for intimacy with your wife, and there are moments for spiritual experiences with something greater than yourself. So, but they actually all agreed that they wanted to hear what was going on, and they would not make it any kind of jokes about that. And I said, okay, so in that case, I will share. So I told him about my experience, and my friend Robert, to my amazement, he says to me, well, it's actually very interesting that you tell us this story, because I've never told that story. But you see, I got this boat where we're sitting here. I got the boat, out of a dream that I wanted to have a boat. And then this boat just show up in a set of meaningful events. And I had to go to another Caribbean islands to get it here. And I wanted to put the name of the boat, a particular name. And that happens to be the name of the boat, which you're standing here, Orion. That's the star system you connected to. So Orion took you to Orion. So my best friend took me there. I mean, in his boat called Orion. So that's where it starts. But okay, so that was pretty interesting, and it took a set of years, 10 years, for me to understand more deeply, because of other sets of events which will make the story too long. That I was at the moment in Venezuela 10 years after that, where I was applying mathematics to understand oil industry dynamics and the finances of Venezuela. And we just saw, my partners and I, that the country was going to collapse in a year time with our mathematical models. And in a window of a week, we knew where the country was going to collapse. And that model I built before even I started to giving class in the university with some students that I conducted their thesis. That model was in my mind. I haven't yet programmed it or drafted in equations, but because at that time when I was a student, I was driving to university near a mountain, beautiful mountain called Mount Avila, El Cerro El Avila. I was driving to my university classes, and I had this vision, a kind of hallucination, if you want to call it like that, but something that you cannot touch with your fingers. It's just a vision in front of me, and I'm driving in the highway. So, I'm not really convenient. You see what I'm saying? So, but that vision was kind of here, and it wasn't bothering me to drive. And the vision was like a big ball, was white, shrinking very quickly, and a small ball that was black becoming big. And, just imagine the yin and yang, but in three dimensions, and then the white part becoming small and the black part becoming big. And so I didn't understand what was that until years later, when I saw all the poverty growing and all the crime growing in Venezuela. And then I was at that time now at the verge of a financial collapse in a year time. And I have been pondering on that vision for some time, building the mathematical models. So I said at that time when I knew things were going to collapse, and I talked to my partners and some of the bankers that we used to consult and all that, I went to my apartment and I said to God, well, this is beyond one human, and this is beyond politics or religion or economics. This is more to do with the quality and the consciousness of each of us. And so if there is anything I think you need to do here, God, in the world, that's the time to do it, because I don't think we have a solution out of this situation without help from the higher power. And so I said to, in my conversations with God, the way I converse with God, I just said to God, well, um, you need to answer us, because there is no way that I can continue with this work, um, thinking that everything's going to be right because of our own efforts, when I know for sure in my soul, I have this sense of certainty that everything is going to be pretty disastrous. And so, after days of, hours and maybe 24 to 36 hours of deep meditation in a room by myself with no physical light and sensory information, um, I just heard this voice telling me, my son, the day is beautiful. So I knew I had to leave the room, because that was kind of an order without being an order. It was an advice without being an advice. And it was not a human voice like you would hear somebody talking to you, or nothing like that. It was more a voice of a sort that made me aware that it was signaling me it was a beautiful day and I had to go and live my life. But that wasn't me just rationalizing that. That was a presence in a voice. And of course, um, well, I mean, I could go on and on with that story, but I don't know if that's enough for you, or you want more details on that story, or you want to move on to other subjects. It's entirely up to you. I can continue, or I can move on.
So what made you really trust? Like you were in meditation and 36 hours, so you could be hallucinating and hearing other voices, but you trusted that was a voice of God. And same thing as you stepping into fully, being this ambassador of peace, meeting people one person at a time and leaving behind what you've built, in which sense that a lot of us, that's the achievement that we want to have, right? Beautiful career, business, and you're doing well. And in that moment, you said, I trust this voice that lead me, that asked me, or whether it's a leading or asking, that made you said, okay, I'm going to sell everything and I'm going to live this way.
Yeah. I understand. So I'm going to give you a little bit more of that story where the trust had to be built. It was in my face. So basically, I was in that room, and I was immersed in warm water. Where I chopped a basket of fruits, because at that time I said to God, I'm not moving here until you answer me. So when I'm telling you the story that I heard the voice of God saying, my son, the day is beautiful. That's after several very meaningful events in those states of meditation. So what basically happened is that at that time, um, there were just, I experienced this incredible sense of infinite space within me in my meditative state. So I realized that I was really, a huge space walking in a small physical body. But, once my sense of being a physical human being disappeared, I was that infinite space. And in that space, there was room for everyone. Then I realized that space was actually the space in which I've been existing, which I would call for now I am. Okay, it's an existential space, which I can call I am. But it's not just I am in a personal way as a human. It's I am in the form of an existential I am that anyone can experience. And so that was for me the presence of the Most High God. I am. So what happens is that, in that space, I started, it was like a crystalline, let's call it, metaphorically, a crystalline water space. Yeah, where there is water and it's crystalline, you can look through it, and then in that space, let's say for the sake of, also for the sake of illustration, because that didn't happen, but you drop a little drop of liquid, which is a yellow or a pink drop, okay? And so that pink drop enters the water space, and then it turns the water a little bit pink, but then it dissipates and the water goes back to crystalline. Okay, and then there was another drop after that, which would be a drop of yellow, which will turn the water into yellow and it will,
Mm.
dissipate. And those were actually what I'm trying to convey to you, is that in that space, I experienced two qualities within me, within that space, within myself, my sense of existence. The pink metaphor, it's an immense love, an incredible love that I cannot describe in words. It's greater than any human love, the love I have for my family, my parents, a person who could have been my wife at that time. Any love I have experienced in human form, that was very small compared to this huge sense of love. And then I experienced a huge strength, a very, very big strength. And in that strength, I even took two stones, two quartz stones that were decoration in my bathroom, and I smashed them, and then I saw little kind of sparks that coming out of that quartz, and the lights were off, and the quartz was kind of hitting my body, and I didn't even open the door at the lights to see if I hurt myself. It was okay. It was just I had so much strength in me that in no fear, and those two qualities, strength and and love, great love and a great strength, I felt within me. And after some minutes have passed of that experience, I heard within me, with that kind of voice, which is not human. Okay, it's not English or Hebrew or Balinese or Indonesian. None of that. It's just a certain quality of communication. I heard and saw very clearly the names of Yeshua and Moshe, which in English would be the equivalent of Jesus and Moses. Okay, but they were Hebrew names. Yeah. And then I felt that these qualities that I experienced, I had a sense that these were visitations from these great souls of the past. And then
Yeah.
I spoke these words to myself, because there was nobody in that room. Yeah, I mean, to God and to whoever was in my inner space. Uh, you get out of here. I just want a direct connection with God. I don't need any intermediaries between me and the Creator. Whatever He gave you people, He can give me, or different, but it's gonna be to me and not with intermediaries. And that was my request. And immediately I felt I was left in this infinite space again, this existential space called I am. To me, I call it I am. I mean, it's just a name. But
Yeah.
remember, the Tao that can be named is not the real Tao. So you have to keep that on mind. And we don't have a name for that presence that can do justice to the presence itself, because that's an experience. Yeah. And it's a subjective experience. So, all right, it's just that so many people report experiences like that we
Yeah.
cannot ignore them, even when we have not yet had the experience. It's like having an intimate space when you're 15 years, 16 years, 17 years old. You never had that. When you're entering adulthood and you want to have a family, well, at one stage, you have to take advice from your elders to see, well, you're going to experience an intimate moment with your husband or wife, at least in old times. Now maybe it's more informal and things happen quicker. I don't know, because I'm not on the streets to tell you, but the point is that an intimate experience of any kind, it's an experience. It's not something you learn in a book. You see
Yes.
what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
and
So
it's
my
subjective, but
mm,
it's similar for many humans. So yes, you were saying something.
sorry. Questions to you then. Was this, were you building up to that experience? Were you meditating a lot? Were you communing a lot with, or wanting that access with God prior to that one event? Or was it just in that one moment you're just having some thoughts that, I really need to hear God, and I'm investing this whatever next days until I hear you, God, because yeah, I think I love the way that you say it. I'm not gonna leave this room until you say something to me. So
But remember that desire and that commitment that I made to myself was based on the fact that I found myself without any tools, human tools, to really facilitate the change for good in the country. And most of my friends were in the similar situation. My uncle was an advisor to the then president of Venezuela, Carlos Andrés Pérez. He found himself in similar situations. So really, the people who, many of the people who were counting on a group of people to make a change, they couldn't find that change. There was, and for me, basically was not an endeavor, it was not economic, religious, or political. It was a transformation of the human society and each human being to grow, to get out of survival mode and corruption and playing little and developing their full potentials and become better people and greater souls. And so that's why I went, to my private meditative space to say to God, until you answer me, I'm not moving from here. Because I was asking God, well, you've promised through our ancestral lines that when we call upon you, you will answer. That when we seek to you, we will find you. And that when we come with commitment and a genuine heart, we will unify with you in oneness to walk with you, and you will show us the way and you will provide. That's since my childhood. I've been listening to those stories from my mother's side and my dad's side, let's say a little bit of the Jewish Egyptian line from my mom's side, and American Welsh and maybe Irish or English, yeah, most likely English line of my dad. And so they were not really religious people. So I was connected with the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition because I grew up in a Jewish school and I did my bar mitzvah and all those kind of things. But on the other side, I was very connected with the Christian tradition that my dad left behind. But I had most of my friends were from Christian schools where I played soccer with them. So I knew really well growing up in Venezuela the story of Jesus. And for me, these two stories, they were not apart, even though Christians would like to think like that, some Christians and some Jews would like to think like that. For me, they were not. They were absolutely one story, which somehow humanity has managed to divide and create, a war between them in the past. And thanks God, in the last maybe 80 years or 100 years, it's been healing. That process is being more of an integration than a problematic process. So I wanted to understand how these prophets of old and prophetesses of old, like Deborah and like, Queen Esther and the wife of Abraham, and people who were previous to any religious belief, like Judaism or Christianism or Islam, when Abraham was alive and before Abraham, Noah and Enoch and all these beings that are referred to in the Bible that walk with God, I wanted to know that experience, not a religious practice or a meditative practice or a set of rituals that I know have played a part to keep alive, the families that wander the earth for 2,000 years, being expelled from one place to another without having a place to go. I mean, the traditions have played a really important role in keeping this wisdom alive. But I wasn't, my focus was not on that. My focus was on, I want to walk like the prophets of old. I want to see God's face like Jacob did. I want to experience, Isaiah's experience. I want to be one with the Father as Jesus claims to be one with the Father. That was my desire. So, of course, I had all these understandings, but I didn't have the experience. And on top of that, I left those. I mean, I was never a religious person. I was more of a scientific minded person, an engineer, a surfer, a jazz musician. So for me, religion played a, let's say, a symbolic part, a traditional family part from my mom's side, but it wasn't something that I wanted to practice in a ritualistic way every day. But I read a lot of the Hindu teachings and the Chinese teachings hand in hand with biblical scriptures or Kabbalistic texts like the Zohar. And, um, and so for me, the integration of all this ancient wisdom that was signaling to one experience of enlightenment or oneness with God was more important than any rituals that would, that would make me put a meal for the celebration of Pesach or Passover or whatever, or Christmas or things like that, which I hardly celebrated, but in Venezuela I did celebrate because it was a Christian nation and that was party time. So anytime. So the point is that I left behind the traditional way of praying, in churches or synagogues to actually devote myself to a very deep state of meditation where I learned a lot of the traditions of yoga. Not that I did yoga, but I reading and having friends that knew how to practice hatha yoga and breathing, and they were really advanced in that. And I had friends who have been in India and were parts of the temples, and so they will show me how to do things. So I'll put in practice those practices. I also met a really interesting guy who was a Buddhist monk who gave me, it wasn't a formal initiation to a group of disciples, but you could, for all practical purposes, say that he initiated me in some branch of Buddhism that he practiced, which was the Karmapa practice. But it was not for me to follow after the Karmapa tradition. It was just some elements of meditation and practices and breathing techniques and mental techniques that he told me these were used. And then I understood from my family line, the Kabbalistic side of my family line, that those meditative states were also part of the Kabbalistic meditative traditions. And so I felt at home in every one of them because that kind of collapsed in one form of my own personal way of meditating without having to be part of any group, which I like. And so in that sense, that was leading or preparing me, if you want, to be able to stay in a bathroom for 36 hours without moving, just having a quiet moment and not being bothered by what am I going to do, my partners in business and things like that. So I had that preparation, plus surfing, which usually you get into the ocean, you sit in your surfboard and you wait for the wave. So you have to be patient. You're not in control of the ocean. So a combination of surfing, meditation, and going into the mountains every day had physically and mentally and emotionally prepared me to be able to say, I'm not moving from here until you answer me. But the determination was a similar determination of the prophets of old, like, Jacob wrestling with an angel until he sees the face of God, that kind of thing. I think that's very illustrative of the real mystical path. When Jesus said, nobody comes through the Father but through me, I'm kind of convinced that this is an angelic statement from these angels that are the gatekeepers to those levels of integrity and those levels of spiritual experience. And so I guess that I merited being there
And
because
yeah.
what happens after this situation in the restroom is that I went out when I told you, the voice of God said, "This beautiful day." I went out there and I went walking to the park near my home, which usually takes me an hour jogging. It took me like 6 hours just walking so slowly, appreciating the ants and the flowers and people on the street. They'll see me on the floor looking at the ants, say, "What's going on?" And I will say to them, come, look at these ants. And they say, are you nuts or what? And why am I nuts? I'm just appreciating the beauty of nature. I'm too rushed every day and I've missed all these flowers and all these things. And so they say, oh yeah, but I have to go to work. And so I understood that, but I was in grace. So that day in the park of the city, when I arrived there, somebody, I was sitting in the park looking at the buses outside the walls of the park and the smoke and the noise, and all that appeared beautiful to me, which I know it's not because it's pollution and it's buses, rationally and physically, that's not pleasant. But at that moment, in the state of grace I happened to be, it was extremely beautiful to be alive, witnessing to all that pollution included and noise included in the city park. And suddenly I'm thinking, just a thought that crossed my mind, who am I going to share this with? Because I was committed not to move from that state of grace. I mean, nothing of this world was more valuable than that which I've just discovered that day. And then what happens is that when this thought crossed my mind, who am I going to share that with? I feel a hand tapping on my shoulders. So I turn my head. It's this woman who asks me, "Who are you?" And I remained silent because I didn't have an answer to her question apart from the state of grace which I was, which I didn't have an answer for her. And then she said to me, I usually jog every morning around the park, and today I could not move past that place over there. She signals, yeah. And when I turned my head, I saw you, and I knew that peace that I felt that stopped me was coming out of you. So I want to know, who are you? So, I said to her, well, then I may be that peace. That was the answer I gave her. I am the peace that you felt. And so she said to me, would you mind coming with me to a conference? In Las Torres del Parque Central, there are two towers called Central Park or something like that in the city, towards the west of the city. And there usually they held a lot of conferences in those towers, in some conference rooms. So she told me, would you mind coming to, because there is a talk about peace and harmony and how to connect with love and things like that. And I say, so I raised my hand and I said, well, I just asked God, who am I going to share this with? So if you want to take me there, I'm coming with you. So when I got there, I found there my partners in business who were leaving messages in my answer machine asking me to go there, but I've never heard them. My partner said to me, didn't you hear the message? So you heard the message because you're in the conference. I said, no, I heard the message in here. The woman gave me the message. And, after that, another set of meaningful events happened at that conference, but it would be too long to tell you today. But what I can tell you is that, I was looking at a person, and this man with big eyes, very, very peaceful presence, with a beard. It was kind of a biblical character, really. This man looks at me and says, you've always been in that journey and you've come, everything's gonna be all right. So sort of that was the message, yeah. And then I am asking him, can you really be a little bit more explicit about what you're saying? Because he named the person there in that room that only me and God and one of my best friends knew about. And he's relating me to that person, and he didn't know I have any relationship to that person. There was no reason that total stranger would know. So he says to me, what do you want me to tell you? That you kicked out of your restroom, out of your bathroom, Jesus and Moses. He's a total stranger. That happened just some hours ago for the first time in the history of my life. All right. And I said to him, yeah, that's pretty specific. So I know who's inside you. I know who's speaking. And he said to me, it works really nicely. It drove me crazy for some years until I learned to listen carefully to the voice inside me. And I said to him, thank you. I understand now, that you're talking to me in a certain way. So that comes from a greater place than just your human memory processes, your human brain. And he said, yeah, absolutely. So that was part of more or less the conversation I had with this man. So of course, that was my first story. So then I had to go to my partners in business, after all these things have happened, to tell them that I'm going to leave my businesses and go and walk the earth like the prophets of old. and my mother and my family. And, so I was preparing to deliver that message. And so I wrote a message to God because I thought, well, I wrote, Father and Mother, I don't know where you are physically, but you know where I am. So you must come and get me. I'm writing this letter because that's the way humanly I write to my friends who are somewhere else in another country or another galaxy, if that's where they are. I send them a letter or a message, a human message. But I'm sure, being God, you know exactly what I'm going to tell you. So I told God at that time, a little bit in a joke, a little bit, with a certain truth within my soul. I think, you know, waiting for Jesus for 2,000 years is too long to bring peace to the earth. Waiting for the first coming of the Jewish people, which is about 3,500 years, is even longer. And waiting for the last avatar, the Kalki avatar in the Hindu tradition, which is about 5,000 years, it's even longer. And so I I think that's not how it should be. So if you need somebody down here, one or more people, but if you need a person to do that job, I'm applying for the job. And that was my letter to God. Now you may say to me that I'm not equipped for the job, and I would completely take that as completely take it on board. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. You're God, you know better, but you can train me. So now the ball is in your turf. And at that moment, I just had a set of in my face events that, it would, if you remove all the Hollywood tricks, it would look very much like a movie like, Bruce Almighty or Evan Almighty, that kind of experience, which, it looked like science fiction, but I had these experiences on my face. So I went to my parents and family and said, I need to close all my businesses and all my lecturing at university and walk with God like the prophets of old in modern life. And of course, I was already set for life with my career and my family and my business and all that, and none of that could have ever stopped my determination to do God's will, because the answer I had is very unusual. It's I understood it was not a hallucination very clearly. I could articulate that properly, to anybody. And I was very well grounded in my scientific knowledge too, and rational thinking. And I've read a lot of philosophers way before that. So I knew that whatever happened to me was beyond my rational scientific explanation at that moment. And so, but I had to walk with God, and I had to walk with God in God's will, in God's terms, not in my terms. And I didn't know what that meant at that time because I've never walked with God in God's terms, you see? So I had to sit at my place and go surfing at the beach and just be available and just have, like fire brigades are at the fire station.
Yeah.
They're training, they're meditating. Well, not meditating, but they're doing their fire
Yeah.
training. I'm meditating. I'm just being there until a call happens. Then I have to move, like the fire people. Yeah, they have to
Yeah.
move when the call happens, and they hear a ringing. Somebody rings the fire brigade, or somebody rings the bell, or well, there are internal signals that I am aware and attentive to that are calls. And since then, I've always been at the right place at the right time when God calls me. So this is how I know this is for real, because after 30 years and talking to a lot of my friends, some of them think that I just lost the plot, or I believe I'm Jesus, which I never believed I'm the reincarnation of anybody, because I don't believe in reincarnation. But I am convinced that the light that dwell in Jesus or any other prophet or other beings in any culture that embodied that kind of values and light and understanding is the same light that have touched me, because I believe there is only one, all being. There is only one most high God. There is only one Tao. It's not, you can label it in many ways, but there's only one. And that is not a human being or a human form. So I never saw myself as the totality of that being. I saw myself as an expression, now conscious of that being. And before I became conscious, I was still an expression of life and of the spirit of the all, but in a human unconscious way, with my habitual patterns, with my learning processes, in the manner of, if you want, Piaget or any other person that can explain learning, and psychologically. But there is a moment that something changed. My cognitive map just tapped into something which I never learned by practicing anything. It was just revealed to me. And since then, I've been on this journey for 30 years, non-stopping, in total faith, doing well. Actually, other doors opens for me to contribute to the world of science with my master's in cognitive science. Then that was another set of miracles. That's like 10 years after I left everything, yeah. And then, to bring a synthesis, to understand a synthesis between modern science and spiritual wisdom, ancient spiritual wisdom, and also personal revelation, so that I can bring try to promote a body of knowledge, which is a participative body of knowledge. I don't have the authority on that, but I have a say on how this integration could happen, to the future for the next generation of kids, because I'm convinced that every human being can be one with God, and any religious dogma that states the contrary, it's just a limitation of human interpretation. It's not something that I can support based on my own personal experience, and the science we know biophysically, we're not limited to a subjective experience of any kind of subjective experience that any human being, prophet or not prophet, had, past, present, or future. So, and on top of that, it's up to God to decide who experienced that and who doesn't, depending on how genuine they are, in the way they want to relate to the all being, to the Most High. So I am working on that synthesis between ancient spiritual wisdom and modern science, cognitive neuroscience, and quantum physics, and biophysics, and linguistics, and some things like that, to try to intellectually make us more receptive to the possibility of living in God's will, or living in the order of the universe, if people don't have a reference to God or believe in God, embodying the highest possible values we can embody in human form, like love, like truth, humor, unity, and things like that. And understanding that those values can be part of a field of values which are inherent in the universe, in the natural environment that we call the universe, and that also those values may be, spiritual values may be conforming a field which is below Planck scale, or below, or interacting with the fields we know, and so on and so on. So I'm kind of exploring ways in which we can bring that dimension into scientific investigation, whether it is with a combination of first person, second person, and third person perspective. And that's been my last, let's say, since 2002, maybe 1999, 2000, around that time till now, my last 24 years has been devoted to that synthesis, because in the journey God took me through by the hand, which, by the way, I walked the country of New Zealand for a year, and I met a lot of people, and all this journey has been without working, to produce any kind of cash. So it's been, friends and family and people that I know that look after my basic needs when I'm providing my services at no cost, whatever the services might be. I mean, I may be looking after the baby of a person, or I may be just doing some mathematical equations for a friend at university that needs my support. I've been publishing papers, and it's all voluntary. I do nothing for cash, because I thought, well, that would be a good accountability. If I can travel the world in faith, and God provides through nature and through people, and I provide of my own values and my own skills without having to make it a commercial activity, but more of a family activity, a greater family activity, then, that would make the point, that I'm on the right track. And that's been 30 years. So, okay, so then I've written about mathematical models where we can develop economies based on actions of kindness. That's nothing new. Every family operates in an economy based on actions of kindness. At least families with family values and ancient family values that go from generation to generation. Your grandmother never charged you a penny for cooking for you every day, and you never charge your grandmother a penny for painting her house or helping repair a host or a chair. Why did I do that? Because I love my grandmother and she loved me. So why can I not treat you like that? Which you're not my blood sister or my grandmother. That love can be also displayed to the greater family. And I imagine that's why a person like Jesus or other ancient prophets were saying, love thy neighbor as yourself, love others. So that becomes the currency. Love and actions of kindness become the currency of an economy that can exist like that. The problem is when people occupy territories and then they charge you taxes for their own coins that they coin, like the Caesar of Rome or whatever, and then a market economy puts barriers to people who can give of themselves and they don't want to charge money. But in economies like in the Western world, there are many places that if you don't bother anybody and you can provide for yourself and you're not relying on the government or others, and this is the way you're living and you're not earning cash, you don't have to pay taxes. If you're not earning money, you don't pay taxes. If you give of yourself, you're actually welcome in institutions, families, and in different places, because people need a helping hand. And so, you don't have to go through institutions to be a helping hand, you see, because you can learn that in your family and your community, and then that can become a cultural, framework for a nation. And let's see if that can be the future of humanity without turning to communism, or any form of, kind of giving the appearance of that when it's actually a corruption of that, because there are leaders on top who claim that kind of equal treatment. Yeah, where in my family line we're not communist, in our home we just love each other, and we're not capitalist in the sense that the lands belong to us. We share it with neighbors and want neighbors to come and share with us, and so there are no borders with the neighbors that we trust, that are respectful and live in integrity. You see what I'm saying? So if we build integrity and we build relationships that can be reliable on truth and love and unity, then we can experience this kind of economy based on actions of kindness. Which, by the way, I imagine the first people who started the United States of America, started like that. Everybody put off their hearts what they could and participated in breaking free from the tyranny of England and creating a new endeavor. Fathers and mothers had to trust each other from different families with a vision for the future that was absolutely ethereal. I'm sure that the English Empire must have called them all terrorists or a threat to the kingdom or whatever. And so this is nothing new. This is a matter of understanding what our ancestors have gone through to come up with better ways of living in peace and freedom and even sanctity and sacredness and holiness, and make that whole happen in modern life. And I hope that we can get to that place collectively. This is not something that can be enforced or can be taught at schools. It can only be shared, between people, and perhaps some elderly people or some more advanced young people who are spiritually driven may inspire or may touch spiritually others. And that may propagate as we liberate ourselves from over control from governments, and we rely more on our capacity to work together, to do things good together, which do not necessarily require the production of paper money or currency or Bitcoin currency, but may also a currency of love participate in the market of exchange, and when things are done under God, like the United States would claim to be a nation under God, then of course the currency of the God of the United States that we know of would be something more Judeo-Christian than Buddhists, yeah, or something like that. Well, that God, it's demanding from us, not demanding in a bad way, but is requesting us to be kind and to be loved and to treat each other as brothers and sisters. So I think we have the precedence of God's law before we have the precedence of the law of the land or the rule of law in a republic like that. And same would I say, there is grounds for that in Polynesia and kingdoms like, the kingdoms, the colonies of England, which could also synergize with the wisdom of the people who were there before the English came. And like the Hawaiians, they have the aloha spirit. And so there are ways to reconnect as one people amongst a diversity of cultural manifestations of that which is good and holy and benevolent. So that's what I'm devoted to the scientific endeavor and the spiritual endeavor of bringing these two things together, and hopefully to inspire more people to go for it and give it a go. Try to connect with God directly and see what happens.
Amazing. One last question from me. So, how do you see all this connected to human potential?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So, okay, so human potential have different many layers to it. Okay, so we can think in terms of human potential, in how far I can go in surfing or soccer, sports or arts, as a musician or ballet or as an academic or a philosopher of a scientist, how much of my mind I can use to discover new things for good for humanity, or as a person, as people who can connect with the Most High God or the Spirit of life, and then become an embodiment of that love and that wisdom to others. So that's the foundation of anyone who will develop their skills, like artists or sports people or musicians or anything else, or doctors or scientists. So I think human potential has these layers, but I think the foundation for human potential has to be the development of one's character and identity in a spiritual way, where I'm not anymore, I'm not seeing myself necessarily as an engineer or doctor or as a musician or as a mother or as a father, even though I do that. And I have this gender which is male and you have yours which is female. And those are identities that are biophysical, yeah, and social identities and corporate identities, if you want, if you're part of a corporation. But I'm talking more as our identity in value, spiritual value form, meaning the values of the creator, the values of the spirit of life, like love, so that I can really say, I am love. I am the love of God made flesh. I am, and it's not a cliche, it's not something I repeat like a parrot. It's something that I know myself, human being, to be in that connection, in that relationship with the spirit. So my identity, it's actually the image of God, the spiritual values of the creator embodied in human form. And for that, I think we need first to understand from childhood that we are able to aspire and to do that. And if we're going to be busy with the things of life, that's okay. Yeah, but there has to be an element of cultivation of the
Mm,
best person we can be in the spirit. And of course, that's a personal choice for every person. You cannot force anybody to be love or peace, but you can talk about that at the house, at the home, and put the children, on notice that it's something that they will have to consider at one stage when they grow, or if they're already aware of that, to support them to actually nurture that part of themselves, their spiritual identity. And then also, of course, once we're grounded in spiritual identity, and you belong, let's say, to the culture of Indonesia, and I grew up in the culture of Venezuela, or I have part American and part, Jewish, or whatever the cultures, the makeups are, the dressing of the salad is really. I mean, we when we know that we're the salad, that we are the essence embodied in human form, it's very easy to connect there, and the culture it's secondary to it because we're looking at each other as love, as truth, as unity, as the carriers and the embodiment of values, which we know to be the highest form of values that we can embody in human form. So really, the way we cook or the way we dress or the way we pray or the way we speak becomes secondary nature to us when we tap into that identity. And it's not a conflict anymore. There are not conflicting behavioral cultural identities when we know ourselves to be the manifestation of these universal essences and presences and values that the creator makes available to us in a relationship. And so I think that is definitely the end of war. If each of us can see each other in the spirit of the creator and really realize experientially that I am in you, you are in me, and we are in I am, in the greater I am existential being, then there is nothing much more to say, isn't it? It's more a matter of actions uh, than poetry. I mean, we can write songs for the kids and we can write songs for others to inspire them, but for those ones who know nothing, that nothing is necessary to be said. And for those ones who do not know, as the saying goes, nothing that you can say will ever be enough. So that's the human development process that we inherited, and we have to be at peace with that, and we have to interact with what you have to interact with others with what you know, and I have to interact with others with what I know, and when we want to listen to each other, we can learn a lot from each other because God's so vast, and God's revealing to everyone pieces of the puzzle of life. So if I learn to listen, I can see the word of God in another person. Well, many people say, sometimes cliche, sometimes not, sometimes real, God is within. But I always say the opposite to what people tell me, because not because I want to be a rebel, but there is a complementary aspect to every aspect that you will label with words. If you say God's within, then I say, yeah, but God's without, because if I accept that God's within me, I have to accept that God's within you too. And if I have to accept that God's within you, I should pay close attention to what you say, because it might be God speaking to me from without. So, okay, so these people say to me, well, God's without. I say, well, yes, but God's also within, because if God's without, then you listen to him, then suddenly God becomes available to you internally, and that experience, it's yours. So really what I'm saying basically is that within and without are aspects of one being. They're not two. And so that's why I say spirit and matter and the spiritual presence of God and the physical universe are one in a sense. Maybe before the Big Bang, the spirit of the creator was without form, physical form, because there was no universe for God to exist in and express him, herself, itself. But now that we're here, I think we should consider that God is not just a transcendental being, but it's also immanent in the world. It's present with us in the world, and we should pay attention. And okay, so that's a little bit of that question. So how that does relate to human potential? I think I've answered that question, but it's a choice, it's a decision. And to my experience so far, every human being is endowed with that possibility of building that foundation that will inspire every other endeavor that leads to excellence in life, to a really good development, not just of character and spiritual nature, but also of skills properly applied for good in the world and things like that.
Wonderful. Today has been an enlightening conversation. I've learned so much, and there are things that I even want to apply for myself because your persistence in wanting that connection, in wanting to live like a prophet, I think that was key for me to be in this present moment of where things can go in so many different directions, that we can direct that focus and wanting that one thing that I really want. And the connections and love and grace that we have with the divine, it's something that I feel like everybody, including myself, is inspired to have that experience. And you are showing how we can all have it if you also give that commitment to want, that desire to really, really want it. And I feel like that will open us up to all this beauty, not just in the physical realm, which sometimes it doesn't, like you said, it's polluted. We can't really see the beauty. But when we're in that state of grace, we can see all of that, and we can see and we can feel the presence of the divine. We can feel the presence of the unity, the consciousness that everyone have. And that brings peace. And I feel like I'm hearing that peace, that love that we carry is a sort of reflections that I'm you and you and me, and we are all creators, and we can create, we can optimize. I hate the word optimize because people always think like, oh, we have to like put an effort to it, but it's more kind of like allowing what wants to come through us to come through beautifully in the highest form and allow us to create a better world together because we are all creator and we are endowed with that piece of God within all of us if we are allow ourselves to see that and see that in the reflections of others. And that's a beautiful message to hear today. And as this summit is going to be broadcasted in January 2025, I hope this also inspires everyone to live life and seeking that experience with grace this year as we're stepping into a beautiful new year together. And Joshua, thank you so much for all your messages. Is there any last or remaining message you like to share, or if you like to share that the gift that you're beautifully and generously sharing with the audience today?
Well, I think the gift, it's been, I think, the copy of Paradise Landing and the link to the website. But what I would like to share with the people, since you ask about human potential, is that when they decide to go into that journey, they will find people who will not necessarily concur with that. They will find resistance in their families or friends. Some people will encourage you to do it. And really, it's not about what other people will tell you. And you should be at peace with whatever is going to happen from there, not engage in conflict, debates, conflicting debates. And one thing that it's important for me to share with your audience too, which is this conference, is that there is an element of desire to learn about the things that are paranormal and are, beyond the comprehension of science and all that. And it becomes this kind of quest for knowledge and the mystery and how to be telepathic and how to do remote viewing and all that. It's okay because those are gifts that come as a consequence of the journey. I didn't share with you many of those experiences that I've had in my life, but what I can tell you is this: when I wrote my thesis and I stepped into this journey with God, that became secondary and even tertiary. It wasn't anymore about becoming telepathic or using those gifts that God has opened for me. It was about peace. I think the priority of this world is inner peace, each individual, and social harmony. Then the rest will follow. The rest, because let's say telepathy, it's a technology that you can call it a technology that if we know how to master, we can use it for war or for peace. So that doesn't that see, this is not a battle between, spiritually advanced people. It's not Star Wars what I want to see. It's actually the manifestation of peace on this earth. And so that battle in heaven, if you want, that Armageddon, that battle in heaven of the revelations of the New Testament, it's not something I dwell in. This is something which I see as a possibility or a potentially, harmful situation between evolved beings that battle in heaven. But this is not what I'm up to. I'm up to peace, the unification of the peaceful unification, to witness that by the hand of the Spirit in each of us, the Spirit of peace. And so that's what I wanted to say. Focus on that is a very important thing in my journey that led me to be able to achieve all the other gifts, without seeking for them. They were revealing to me as I walked in peace.
They reveal themselves to you as you walk in peace. That is lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's been a wonderful conversation. I'm so honored to have you here with us today. Thank you, my audience, for being here and listening to this session. I will see you on the next one. I'll see you
Thank you,
later.
Karen. Until next time.
Okay, thank you.